2 versus 2. A pair of Russian Su-25s head straight for Kyiv's government district, but they're spotted by 2 Ukrainian MiG-29s patrolling the skies. This might be the first battle since Vietnam where pilots see their enemies up close through cockpit canopies. The outcome seems obvious. Su-25 ground attack jets are no match for MiG-29s. But here's the catch. Shooting down jets directly over the government district is about as helpful as letting them drop their bombs. What did the Ukrainian pilots do instead? Let's hear it straight from them. I visually spotted a pair of Su-25s hugging the right bank of the Dnipro River. They were flying at about 165 feet above the ground, practically skimming the riverbed. The Ukrainian pilots divided the targets between them, since the Russian dynamic duo decided to split up and go in different directions. My wingman's target climbed above the clouds, turned around and tried to flee. The wingman fired a missile. The Russian pilot was heading north, away from Kyiv, but the air-to-air missile caught up with him a few minutes outside the city. The pilot's fate is unknown, but there was still one Su-25 circling over Kyiv. So what became of him? My target was maneuvering really close to the ground. Engaging him over the city wasn't an option. And then came an unexpected twist. Someone on the ground launched a missile from a MANPADS. The Ukrainian pilot caught the launch in his rearview mirror and had to break off momentarily to avoid the missile. The maneuver worked. The missile missed. But then, when it came back for another attack after the missile had passed, he lost control and just crashed into the ground. And maybe, at that moment, Kyiv locals started whispering about a pilot with the call sign the Ghost of Kyiv, defending his city. Turns out, it was our unit, our brigade, defending Kyiv, the Kyiv region, the north, and the center of Ukraine from the very first hours of the war. Meet Juice, a Ukrainian pilot. He was the first to emphasize that Ukraine desperately needed F-16s, and, fun fact, he convinced the US Congress faster than most politicians could dream of. Just a regular Ukrainian guy. Sadly, he died in a plane crash before the first American jets arrived in Ukraine. But in the first 30 hours of Russia's invasion, Juice's unit and Bjolar claimed 6 air victories over Kyiv. They shot down 2 Su-35s, 2 Su-25s, 1 Su-27, and a MiG-29. What a record! Give it a thumbs up if you think this could inspire the next Top Gun. But here's a question. Why are the Russian planes flying so low? Here's the deal. Flying below 490 feet makes it harder for ground-based radar to spot you. It's basically the military equivalent of hiding under your mom's couch. On top of that, water surfaces mess with radar signals. Russian pilots were using riverbeds as highways, sneaking close to their targets. Bold move, but also a massive mistake. Here's what we mean. According to General James B. Hecker, when it first started out, they were flying right into the surface-to-air missile engagement zones of the Ukrainians. Why were they charging in like flies into a spider's web? There's an explanation. On February 24, 2022, Russian forces hit at least 11 airfields overnight and another 10 throughout the day. Their goal? Wipe out Ukrainian planes on the ground before they could even take off. But I turn on the radio and I hear, "All crews take off." Now, let's clear something up. A fighter jet isn't a car. You can't just turn the ignition and cruise to the nearest parking lot. Pilots need special gear and flight orders. Planes have to be fueled and armed. But the Ukrainian command had planned for this and managed to pull it off. Still, there were a few hiccups. There was this huge line, a literal traffic jam of planes on the runway. But Dmytro got airborne and relocated his jet to another base, as did most of his comrades. That's how Ukraine saved nearly all its operational aircraft and pilots. Nearly. After I took off, my comrade was taxiing next. Unfortunately, a cruise missile hit the third one in our group. The last in line was Lieutenant Colonel Eduard Vaharovsky, posthumously named a hero of Ukraine. He was supposed to take off first, but let others go ahead of him. Andriy made it into the air, but what awaited him was deadly chaos. I armed my weapons and saw cruise missiles flying above me. Then the command came. Engage everything without waiting for clearance. But I couldn't intercept them. They were way too high. I climbed as high as I could, but it didn't help. That was just the beginning of his adventure. Minutes later, his jet's navigator failed, and the radar lost track of his plane. I asked, "Where am I?" They replied, "We don't see you. We don't see you." I had no idea where I was. Picture this. Your first combat flight. It's pitch dark. Explosions everywhere. Enemy missiles in the sky. And you've been zooming at 500 miles per hour for 40 minutes with no clue where you are. At one point, Andrei decided to land on a highway, a maneuver they had drilled during pre-war exercises. He even picked a well-lit stretch of road. All he had to do was burn off some extra fuel. But just as he began his descent, contact was re-established. His plane showed up on radars 25 miles from an airfield in western Ukraine. A bit of technical magic later, Andrei landed safely, where his comrades were already waiting. But minutes later, that airfield was hit by missiles too. Thankfully, the strikes targeted infrastructure, sparing the jets. What happened on the morning of February 24th, moving the planes out of harm's way, was a unique operation. There's nothing like it in aviation history. So many aircraft airborne simultaneously for a relocation mission. Whew! Thumbs up if you think Top Gun is a kid's show compared to this. So, how did a Ukrainian MiG-29 vanish from radar and lose navigation? Well, apart from airfields, the Russians hit 50 other military sites, including ground-based radar systems. Some were destroyed by missile strikes, making life much harder for Ukrainian pilots. That's why those cocky Russian jets we mentioned earlier felt so confident. And that's where they messed up. Ukraine's surviving air defense systems were quickly relocated. This preserved a multi-layered air defense network using S-300 medium-range systems, short-range systems like Buck and Tor, and man-portable air defense systems, MANPADS, like Igla and Stinger. These systems became the nightmare fuel for Russian bombers early in the war. But let's not kid ourselves. Taking down a plane with a MANPADS is no walk in the park. When hunting a helicopter, a ground operator has about 3 seconds to aim and fire. Against a jet, even less. And if you're standing in a forest or hilly terrain, good luck figuring out which direction the plane is coming from. Despite the challenges, Ukrainian shooters often turned Russian bombers and attack jets into scrap metal. Mobile air defense units kept Russian aviation from gaining air superiority. Constantly changing locations boosted not only their effectiveness, but also their survival rate. As a result, Russian planes had to adjust their tactics, avoiding Ukrainian-controlled airspace altogether. You'd think this gave Ukrainian pilots a break. Not a chance. For example, we operate in specific areas of the front. Our task might be to suppress enemy air defenses so helicopters and attack jets can strike with rockets and bombs. We started analyzing their moves, luring their air defenses into range of our own. They'd fire missiles at us, and we'd bait them closer until they got caught in our air defense trap. A deadly game of cat and mouse. But when a pilot's plane takes a hit, here's what happens. From the moment something goes wrong to the plane crashing takes about 6 seconds. I was flying at 3,000 feet and ejected somewhere around 1,600 to 1,900 feet. The jet was nearly uncontrollable, with flames all around me. I ejected, and as my parachute opened, I saw the burning plane crash near a forest not far away. This Ukrainian pilot is now undergoing rehabilitation for a back injury. Russia has air-to-air missiles, like the R-37, powerful, modern stuff we only learned about during the war. Their MiG-31s, Su-34s, and Su-35s have better weapons and more advanced targeting systems, allowing them to detect our planes from much farther away. Whether we fly low or high, they can still see us. Ukrainian pilots admit Russian jets are technically superior. By 2022, most Ukrainian fighters were 30 to 50 years old. The backbone of the Ukrainian Air Force is the MiG-29, a Soviet-era fourth-generation multi-role fighter developed in the late 1960s. Many of these planes hadn't been upgraded in decades, making them lag behind their Russian counterparts. But here's the kicker. The score keeps rising in Ukraine's favor. Thanks to modern Western weapons, Ukrainian pilots are hitting ground targets more effectively. We now use various munitions like GBU and HARM. They're powerful weapons, even if we can't fully unleash their potential. Here's what we know about the HARM missile. It's a smart American gadget. Its passive homing head locks on to radar signals, but it also has an active radar seeker. Even if Russians manage to turn off their radars, the HARM keeps flying to where the signal was last detected. And with GPS and inertial navigation, it'll hit its target even if the sun goes out. Sure, integrating modern weapons into old Soviet jets wasn't easy, but Ukraine made it work. For HARM launches, a special pylon was mounted on MiG-29s to make it compatible. Using these anti-radiation missiles has seriously complicated operations for Russian air defenses. Taking down systems like the S-300 or S-400, however, is a tough mission that often requires help from ground-based systems like HIMARS. For HARM launches, we had to sync up with other units. Watching HIMARS fire at night, seeing those rockets streak through the clouds, it's breathtaking. No words can describe it. But Ukraine didn't stop there. Soviet-era jets were also adapted to launch Storm Shadow Scalp stealth air-to-ground cruise missiles. These missiles don't just hit coordinates, they actively seek their targets based on preloaded images. Storm Shadows are perfect for taking out command centers, air bases, fuel and ammo depots, and even ships. Yes, they've sunk Russian landing ships and a submarine. The first submarine in history destroyed by a cruise missile. We couldn't hit those targets until we received Western weapons. But Ukrainian pilots have one more critical job: responding to missile strikes and drone attacks. Every time there's an attack, dozens of Ukrainian fighters take to the skies. Dealing with drones and missiles is tough. Their smaller size makes them harder to hit. Some Ukrainian pilots even say dogfighting another jet is easier than hunting down slow, plastic drones. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments.